The stars over the Pacific shimmered as a new light appeared in the night sky, larger, brighter, and growing by the second. On Earth's orbital defense stations, every sensor flared red with proximity alerts. What began as a distant anomaly resolved into something immense, a fleet of warships larger than any humanity had imagined. The Zelthari had arrived. They came without warning, their ships arranged in perfect geometric formations, glowing with blue-white energy signatures unlike anything in human records. Each vessel was massive, shaped like jagged blades cutting through the void, and their numbers were staggering. Above the clouds, Earth's fleets scrambled to formation. Deep space radar confirmed the count. 175 Zelthari warships, supported by carriers the size of floating cities. On the United Earth Communications Network, the message came in, broadcast on every frequency, translated into 100 languages. People of Earth. The voice was cold, metallic, and inhuman. We are the Zelthari. Your system now falls under our authority. You will submit your fleets, your resources, and your loyalty, or your world will be reduced to ash. No one knew how they had learned humanity's languages, but it didn't matter. The meaning was unmistakable. In the orbital command hub above Geneva, Admiral Helena Vance stood before a massive holographic display, arms folded, jaw tight. Around her, officers moved with urgent precision, passing tactical updates, recalculating fleet positions, and readying launch sequences. She had studied the Zelthari for years, quietly, carefully, through intercepted transmissions from the wider galaxy. They were feared beyond measure. Even the most advanced alien civilizations had surrendered without resistance when confronted by a Zelthari fleet. Their reputation was built on an unbroken chain of victories spanning centuries. And now, they had come for Earth. Across the planet, reactions were immediate and intense. Some citizens stared at the sky in awe, others in fear. News channels cut into broadcasts with live feeds of the alien ships drifting above the upper atmosphere, their forms glinting in sunlight. Social media erupted into chaos, with theories, ranging from peaceful negotiation to outright invasion. But inside the command hub, there was no panic, only resolve. Admiral Vance's voice carried through the room. "They think we will kneel," she said, her tone firm. "They think Earth is just another world to add to their empire. They're wrong." She turned to her chief strategist, Commander Elias Park, who was already tapping commands into the Fleet Coordination System. "Status of our preparations?" she asked. "All 10 fleets are in readiness," Park replied. "Mars fleet reports green across the board. Lunar Command says they can launch within the hour. Outer colonies are synchronized for deployment." Vance nodded. She had anticipated this day, not the exact moment, but the inevitability of it. The galaxy was not a safe place, and history had taught her that those who waited for danger to arrive rarely survived it. For decades, humanity had been quietly building, expanding, and experimenting. The Zelthari had assumed Earth would respond with one fleet, like every other civilization had done before. That assumption would be their first mistake. Her comms officer signaled. "Admiral, the Zelthari fleet is broadcasting again." The alien voice returned colder this time. "You have one planetary rotation to decide. Submit or face annihilation." Vance stared at the glowing symbols on the display. To the Zelthari, this was a simple equation: intimidation followed by compliance. They had no idea how humans thought, how deeply humanity's history was woven with defiance, how their very survival as a species had come from refusing to accept defeat. She pressed the transmit control. "This is Admiral Helena Vance of United Earth Command. Your terms are unacceptable. You will leave our system or we will remove you." A pause. Then the alien reply, almost amused. "You believe you can resist the Zelthari?" Vance smiled faintly, though there was no humor in her eyes. You came here fearing the strength of one fleet, she said. That was your second mistake. Transmission ended. Across Earth's spaceports, engines roared to life. Deep in the asteroid belt, shipyards unlocked magnetic clamps. From the ice plains of Europa to the deserts of Australia, launch towers lit up the sky. One fleet had been expected. 10 fleets were ready, and every one of them was armed for war. The countdown had begun. Far beyond the Sol system, in the glittering halls of the Grand Assembly of Allied Worlds, news of the Zelthari's latest confrontation rippled like a seismic wave. The Grand Assembly was a colossal ring station orbiting the white star Varus, its chambers capable of holding thousands of delegates from across the known galaxy. Marble-like walkways arched over glowing pools of light, and a domed ceiling projected a panoramic view of space. On any other day, the assembly was a theater of politics and negotiation. Today, it was an echo chamber of disbelief. Holoscreens flickered above the central floor, replaying the same transmission. Earth's Admiral Helena Vance refusing the Zelthari ultimatum. Delegates leaned forward in their seats, antennae twitching, frills raising, eyes narrowing in disbelief. A tall, crystalline envoy from the Zorelian Dominion broke the stunned silence. They refused? The envoy's voice chimed like a struck bell. Not postponed? Not negotiated? Outright refused? From the shadowed edge of the chamber, a veteran Scythian general leaned on his staff, his scaled face twisted in grim certainty. Refusal means destruction. The Zelthari will crush them, as they have crushed all who defied them before. Earth will not see another sunrise. A murmur swept the chamber, but it stilled as the hollow shifted, showing fleets rising from Earth, Mars, the Moon, and beyond. Not one fleet, not 2, 10. For a heartbeat, no one spoke. That cannot be correct, said an astonished Truvac scholar, her 4 eyes darting over the feed. No single world could build and launch 10 fleets of that size, not in a century, not without collapsing their own economy. But the feed did not lie. 10 distinct armadas, each with its own formation and configuration, ascended into the black. The Lurathi delegate, whose people prided themselves on tactical analysis, tapped his claws against his seat. They are not identical, he observed. Fleet signatures show variance in hull composition, propulsion, and even weapon design. This is not duplication. It is diversification. Each fleet appears optimized for a different combat doctrine. Whispers turned to hushed debate. The galaxy's civilizations had long followed a tradition when facing the Zelthari. Deploy your strongest single fleet, prove willingness to defend, and, when inevitable defeat loomed, seek the best surrender terms possible. The humans, seemed, had ignored tradition entirely. From the central dais, High Arbiter Thale of Wren raised her voice, cutting through the noise. This is unprecedented. Every record in our archives shows the Zelthari have never faced more than 1 opposing fleet at a time. Humans, however, send 10. The question before us is, why? A flicker passed through the hollow screens, an analyst's projection of human industrial output over the past 50 years. The numbers were startling. While many civilizations in the assembly had focused on trade, culture, or exploration, humanity had quietly diverted vast resources into military shipbuilding and experimental weapons research. Even the most cautious estimates suggested Earth's capacity to sustain large-scale conflict was far greater than anyone had realized. It's madness, muttered a merchant guild representative from the Valari Syndicate. They're throwing everything into one gamble. When the Zelthari break the first fleet, the others will fall one by one. Or, countered the Lurathi delegate, each fleet will learn from the last engagement. Imagine, every loss instantly informs the next wave, a constant cycle of adaptation. The Zelthari would face an enemy that grows stronger with every battle. A ripple of unease passed through the chamber. In a far corner, a quiet voice from the Orvan Union said what many were thinking. If the humans succeed, everything changes. The Zelthari's reign of fear ends. The balance of power shifts. The galaxy learns that the impossible can be done. High Arbiter Vren considered this. She had watched 100 civilizations bow to the Zelthari, her own included. Yet there was something in the human refusal, a certain weight, that was different. The Assembly's final image of the session showed Earth's fleets in high orbit, silhouetted against the sun. 10 vast armadas, their drives burning bright, preparing to meet the most feared force in the galaxy. In the silent space, between heartbeats, every delegate in the chamber knew they were witnessing the beginning of something that would be remembered for centuries. In the command hub above Geneva, the hollow map of the Sol system glowed like a living star field. 10 colored markers represented humanity's fleets, each one following its own trajectory toward the incoming Zelthari armada. Admiral Helena Vance stood at the center, silent for a moment, letting her officers work. The murmuring of tactical reports and the soft hum of computers blended into a steady rhythm. It was the sound of preparation, the calm before history bent in one direction or another. Commander Elias Park approached, holding a data pad. All fleets confirm readiness. Mars Fleet is leading in speed trials. Lunar Fleet has deployed its long-range artillery, and the Belt Fleet has completed final drone calibration. No delays. Vance took the data pad but didn't look at it. Her mind was elsewhere. 50 years back in time, in history classes no alien would understand. Humanity had never been the strongest, fastest, or largest species on Earth. Survival had come from something else entirely: adaptability. From the moment humans began shaping stone into tools, they had learned to change, to adjust, to improvise under pressure. Every war, every disaster, every obstacle had forged that skill deeper. The Zelthari did not understand that. They saw war as a precise equation. One overwhelming fleet meets one opposing fleet, and victory is determined by firepower and intimidation. They did not factor in unpredictability. Vance turned her attention back to the hollow map. Each of Earth's 10 fleets was different by design. The Mars fleet specialized in high-speed, long-range missile strikes, perfect for harrying an enemy from a distance. The Lunar Fleet carried the heaviest artillery platforms built for sustained bombardment. The Belt Fleet was a swarm of smaller vessels, deploying autonomous drones to flood enemy sensors. And those were just the obvious roles. Others carried experimental railguns, cloaking fields, or kinetic weapons designed to punch through even the Zelthari's formidable armor. Each fleet was a testbed for a different approach to combat, and every battle would feed new data into the next. Elias Park broke the silence. They'll think it's desperation, that we're splitting our strength. That's what I want them to think, Vance replied. Her voice was calm, measured. The Zelthari believe in breaking their opponent's spirit with a single decisive victory. They're expecting us to pour everything into our first clash. When the first fleet falls, they'll assume it's over. And when the second fleet appears, Park asked, they'll start asking questions, Vance said. By the time they realize there's a third, fourth, and fifth behind it, their strategy will already be compromised. The Admiral walked toward the central display and tapped a control. The image shifted, now showing simulations of Zelthari fleet engagements from archived galactic battles. In every one, the enemy pressed forward in rigid, predictable formations. They have never faced a war of attrition, Vance continued. They're built for intimidation, not endurance. We'll force them to burn through resources, split their focus, and adapt to tactics they've never seen before. We'll make them fight a kind of war they don't understand. In a side chamber, engineers were finalizing loadouts, adjusting power cores, and securing munitions. Messages streamed in from civilian populations, some fearful, some defiant. The people knew they were standing at the edge of something monumental. Vance had one more advantage: the human mindset. In most alien military cultures, a defeat was final. But humanity had centuries of history where defeat was simply a lesson, a stepping stone to eventual victory. That perspective, she believed, would be decisive. Her thoughts were interrupted by a comms alert. "Admiral, the Zelthari fleet is accelerating. Estimated time to contact, 41 hours. She gave a single nod. "Signal all fleets. Begin coordinated positioning, and remind them our goal is not to win the first battle." Park raised an eyebrow. "Then what is our goal?" Vance looked back at the holo map, where 10 distinct paths arced toward the enemy. "To win the last battle," she said. The day the fleets launched, the sky over Earth was not blue. It was streaked with silver trails of fire. From the coasts of Africa to the cities of Asia, people looked upward, shielding their eyes as entire squadrons roared into the upper atmosphere. The ground trembled beneath the thunder of departing engines. In orbit, the staging platforms glowed with activity. Docking arms retracted, magnetic clamps disengaged, and colossal battleships drifted free. The void filled with the steady pulse of ion drives and the sharp flare of fusion thrusters. The first to break formation was the Mars fleet, rising from the shadow of the red planet like a swarm of steel predators. Sleek and angular, their hulls shimmered under the sun's glare, each vessel carrying missile pods capable of launching salvos from millions of kilometers away. Next came the lunar fleet, emerging from the dark side of Earth's moon. They moved, slowly, deliberately, each ship a floating fortress bristling with long-range artillery. These were the siege breakers, the ships meant to shatter enemy lines. From the asteroid belt came the Belt Fleet, a chaotic swarm of small, agile ships, escorted by drone carriers. Thousands of autonomous drones poured into the void, vanishing into stealth mode as they accelerated toward pre-programmed ambush points. Then came the Colony's fleet from Titan, the Europa fleet from the Ice Moon's hidden shipyards, and the Outer Rim fleet from stations far beyond Pluto's orbit. Each armada had a distinct silhouette, a distinct role, and a distinct doctrine. No two looked alike. Yet together they formed a pattern of deliberate complexity. In the grand assembly of allied worlds, the live feeds played across every screen. Delegates leaned forward, transfixed. A dozen different languages whispered the same sentiment. This is impossible. The Zelthari War Council also watched. Inside their command nexus aboard the flagship Blade of Dominion, rows of officers studied the incoming fleets. Data streams scrolled across their vision, their calculations swift and precise. "This is excessive," one Zelthari strategist observed. "The humans have divided their strength." Another replied, "It will not matter. One fleet or 10, the end will be the same." Yet deep within their ranks, a faint ripple of uncertainty began. They had come to intimidate and crush a single opposing force. Instead, they were staring at a sequence of fleets that would arrive one after another, each with new weapons, new tactics, and new unpredictabilities. Back on Earth, Admiral Helena, Vance stood on the observation deck of the Resolute, the flagship of the First Fleet. Her gaze swept across the void where her ships moved into formation. Against the backdrop of the sun, they looked like a web of fire and steel, expanding outward toward the approaching threat. A comms officer reported, "Global uplink is live. Civilian networks are broadcasting the launch to every colony, station, and habitat." Vance nodded. "Good. Let them see it." On Mars, children gathered on rooftops to watch the sky burn with departing ships. On Titan, workers in the methane fields paused to gaze at the distant pinpricks of light accelerating away. Across humanity's settlements, the sight was the same. 10 fleets, 10 declarations of defiance. For the galaxy, it was a spectacle. For humanity, it was a promise. Within hours, The fleets had cleared the gravity wells of their home bases, accelerating into deep space. The first engagement point was plotted, a vast region beyond Neptune's orbit, where the Zelthari vanguard would meet the first fleet head-on. In the silence of space, no cheers could be heard. But across the galaxy, the message was clear without words. Earth would not kneel. On the Blade of Dominion, the Zelthari Fleetmaster gave a slow, deliberate order. Advance. Test their first line, break them quickly before the others arrive. But, far away on the Resolute, Admiral Vance gave her own command, one the Zelthari could not hear. Hold nothing back. Let them believe this is all we have. The trap had been set, and the galaxy held its breath. Beyond Neptune's shadow, the void was quiet. The stars burned cold, the sun little more than a bright coin in the distance. Here, at the edge of Sol's reach, the first fleet waited. The Resolute floated at the center of formation, its hull gleaming silver against the black. Around it, cruisers, destroyers, and carriers formed concentric rings, their weapon arrays hot but silent. Admiral Helena Vance stood on the forward deck, watching the tactical hollow. The Zelthari vanguard was approaching fast, a dark, shifting wedge of ships, their geometry unnerving in its precision. Every vessel was identical in size and shape, their formations so perfect they seemed etched into space itself. Range in 3 minutes, reported Commander Elias Park. Vance's gaze stayed on the hollow. All ships, battle stations. Activate. Phase 1. Phase 1 began with a ripple of light across the first fleet. Shield barriers snapped into place, glowing faintly before fading to transparency. Engines roared, ships adjusting vectors. Drone carriers opened their hatches, releasing hundreds of reconnaissance drones into the void. The Zelthari did not alter course. When the two forces finally crossed into weapons range, the black of space erupted into fire. Human missiles surged, forward in dense waves, each one carrying decoys and countermeasure flares. The Zelthari responded with disciplined bursts of energy lances, precise beams that sliced through multiple warheads at once. Impact on enemy shields. Minimal, reported the weapons officer. Vance had expected as much. Continue pattern Delta. Keep them guessing. From the flanks, smaller human corvettes darted in and out of the enemy's targeting range, firing railgun rounds at vulnerable angles. It was harassment fire, not intended to break the Zelthari line, but to disrupt their perfect formation. The enemy responded exactly as predicted, by focusing their fire on the fast-moving outliers. That momentary shift in attention gave the Resolute and her heavy cruisers the opening they needed. Fire main batteries, Vance ordered. Twin lances of kinetic slugs tore through the void, striking two Zelthari cruisers with bone-shaking force. One vessel's shields flickered, a rare sight that made several bridge officers exchange quick, grim smiles, but the Zelthari recovered instantly. A coordinated counterstrike slammed into the Resolute's forward shields, shoving the ship back with a low rumble. Shields holding at 78%, Park reported. The battle became a deadly rhythm, humans striking in unpredictable patterns, the Zelthari responding with unshakable precision. Yet for all their skill, the First Fleet was losing ground. After an hour of brutal exchange, 3 human destroyers were gone, their wreckage drifting cold. The enemy line still held, their numbers barely diminished. "They're pressing harder," Park warned. "We can't hold this pace for long." Vance's expression didn't change. "Signal the retreat." The order shocked the bridge crew, but they obeyed. The First Fleet began a slow withdrawal, falling back on pre-planned escape vectors. The Zelthari, sensing the moment of collapse, accelerated in pursuit. It was exactly what Vance wanted. As the Resolute crossed the designated marker in space, a sudden burst of signals flooded her comms. A new fleet, sleek, fast, and fully armed, dropped out of slip space behind the pursuing Zelthari. Mars' fleet had arrived. Without hesitation, they launched a storm of long-range missile salvos cutting into the Zelthari rear formations. The enemy found themselves caught between two human forces, one retreating, the other attacking at full speed. The precision of the Zelthari formation faltered for the first time. Their lines bent under the pressure, ships scrambling to reorient. Vance's voice was steady. "Turn us around! Push them into the kill zone!" The Resolute swung back into the fight, her guns joining Mars' fleet's barrage. The void lit up with detonations, the shockwaves rippling through both fleets. By the time the Zelthari broke free and regrouped, two of their heavy cruisers were gone, and the humans had withdrawn in good order. To the Zelthari, it had been a hard-won victory against an unexpectedly stubborn foe. To Admiral Vance, it had been phase one of a much longer game. The Zelthari armada regrouped in the cold space between Neptune and the Kuiper Belt, their formations reknitting with mechanical precision. The First Fleet's retreat had been costly to the humans, but the damage to the Zelthari rearguard gnawed at their war council. They had never expected to lose ships in the opening clash, certainly not to a newly discovered species. Fleetmaster Zorath stood on the command dais of the Blade of Dominion, his multifaceted eyes fixed on the tactical feed. The humans had vanished. From immediate sensors, leaving only debris fields and faint energy trails. "They will consolidate," said his strategist, voice a steady hum. "One fleet remains. We strike before it can be reinforced." But before they could act, the next storm arrived. From the black beyond Pluto, the Belt Fleet surged forward. It was chaos by Zelthari standards, hundreds of small craft weaving through space in irregular patterns, their engines flickering in and out as they deployed decoys. Drone carriers released swarms of autonomous craft, each one carrying signal jammers and miniature warheads. The Zelthari's immaculate targeting systems faltered under the sudden flood of false readings. Energy lances fired into empty space, while human ships slipped through blind spots to strike at supply vessels and escorts. "Unacceptable disruption," a Zelthari tactician growled, attempting to restore sensor clarity. By the time their systems recalibrated, the Belt Fleet had already withdrawn, leaving the Armada with half a dozen crippled support ships and a gnawing frustration. Hours later, before repairs could be completed, the lunar fleet emerged from slip space at an oblique angle. To the Zelthari formation, massive artillery platforms began a relentless bombardment, their kinetic shells traveling at a fraction of light speed. Shields buckled under the pounding. The Zelthari turned to engage, and the lunar fleet disengaged immediately, vanishing into the void before they could be pinned down. Fleetmaster Zorath's mandibles tightened. This was no random assault pattern. It was a deliberate sequence designed to force his forces to burn fuel, expend munitions, and divide attention. In the Resolute, Admiral Helena Vance observed the results with calm satisfaction. From her position in the outer rim, she watched. The Zelthari being pushed and pulled like a predator dragged into a maze. Each human fleet struck in turn, never long enough to be destroyed, always long enough to inflict some damage or disruption. Mars Fleet's missiles tore through isolated patrol wings. Europa Fleet's stealth ships launched sudden raids on Zelthari logistics hubs. Titan Fleet deployed experimental energy nets to briefly trap enemy vessels in place before vanishing into the dark. After each clash, combat data was transmitted instantly to the next fleet in the sequence. Every maneuver, every hit, every shield fluctuation was analyzed and fed into the evolving battle doctrine. By the third engagement, human weapons were targeting shield gaps with unnerving accuracy. By the fifth, Zelthari captains reported that their own predictive algorithms were failing. Inside the Zelthari command nexus, tension grew. Officers argued over whether to pursue the retreating human fleets or regroup to defend their supply lines. The War Council, unused to prolonged campaigns, was fracturing under the constant pressure. "They fight as if they have endless ships," one strategist muttered. "Perhaps they do," another replied quietly, though the suggestion was absurd to their minds. In the assembly of allied worlds, news feeds carried every engagement. Civilizations that had once dismissed Earth as an unremarkable frontier world were now watching in open fascination. Some whispered hope. Others feared the repercussions if humanity actually broke the Zelthari's streak of dominance. Back aboard the Resolute, Vance received the latest after-action reports. The losses were mounting. Humanity was paying in blood and steel for every engagement, but the Zelthari's performance was shifting. Their formations were slower to reform. Their response times were fractionally delayed. It was small, almost imperceptible. But to a strategist like Vance, it was the first sign of something she had been waiting for. They were tiring, and the real blow had not yet been struck. The Zelthari Armada was no longer the flawless blade that had entered Sol's space. After weeks of relentless harassment, its edges were chipped. Formations reknit slower, coordination lagged, and damage control crews worked around the clock just to keep their ships combat-ready. Fleetmaster Zorath stood on the bridge of the Blade of Dominion, reviewing casualty tallies. 58 vessels damaged beyond immediate repair. 7 capital ships lost, fuel reserves at 60%, ammunition stockpiles shrinking. In the Zelthari's long history of war, such attrition was unheard of. Their wars had always been swift. One battle, one surrender, one victory. Now, they found themselves in a campaign without a clear end. The latest blow had come from Titan Fleet, which had slipped behind their lines and unleashed energy nets that trapped 3 cruisers mid-maneuver. Mars Fleet had followed up with a precision missile strike, vaporizing the immobilized ships before the Zelthari could mount a rescue. "This is no longer a test of firepower," Zorath muttered to his inner circle. "They are dragging us into endurance warfare. We were not forged for this." Before his staff could reply, sensors pinged with fresh contacts, an entire new human fleet dropping from slip space. This was the 9th Fleet, hailing from deep orbit stations beyond Pluto. Their arrival was a thunderclap across the tactical channels. Unlike the earlier hit-and-run forces, the 9th Fleet moved like a hammer, ready to fall. Their ships were heavily armored, bristling with heavy railguns and siege cannons. They closed the distance without hesitation, targeting the Zelthari command ships directly. The first barrage struck like meteors. One Zelthari flagship's shields collapsed in seconds, its hull splitting apart under the railgun fire. Another took a direct hit to its propulsion core, spiraling out of formation in a shower of molten fragments. The precision rattled Zorath's officers. The humans weren't just attacking, they were hunting the fleet's leadership, cutting out the command nodes that kept their formations disciplined. Zorath ordered a counterattack, but the 9th Fleet's warships were built to endure punishment. Every moment they held the Zelthari's attention, they created an opening for the other human fleets to converge. Signals flared across the Zelthari's rear lines. Europa Fleet emerging from stealth, Belt Fleet drones disrupting communications, and the remnants of the First and Mars Fleets rejoining from the flanks. The Zelthari were surrounded. The battle unfolded in 3 dimensions of chaos. Zelthari ships tried to break through, but each escape vector was cut off by another wave of human vessels. Railguns, missiles, kinetic slugs, and precision laser fire turned the void into a shifting storm of light and debris. For the first time in centuries, Zelthari crews began broadcasting distress signals, not to their enemies, but to each other. Coordinated retreats became chaotic withdrawals. Units fell out of formation to protect damaged allies. Command orders went unanswered. From the bridge of the Resolute, Admiral Helena Vance watched the collapse with cold focus. She knew the moment. It happened, not when the first ship fled, but when the Zelthari stopped trying to win. "They've lost their will to fight," she said quietly. Park glanced at her. "Do we press the attack?" "Yes," Vance replied. "We don't stop until the choice is theirs, surrender or be destroyed." The humans pressed harder, forcing the Zelthari line to bend, then break entirely. By the time the battle reached its peak, the enemy's center had disintegrated. Isolated pockets of resistance fought on, but the greater armada was in full retreat. And then, as if fate wanted to drive the point home, the 10th Fleet arrived. They didn't fire a shot, just emerged from slipspace in perfect formation, engines, burning bright, their presence a silent declaration that humanity still had more to give. Faced with this, Zorath ordered the signal that no Zelthari had given in living memory. "All forces, disengage." The Zelthari ships turned and fled into deep space, leaving behind the wreckage of their once feared armada. In the quiet after the last battle, the Sol system seemed impossibly still. Wreckage drifted in the dark, hulks of Zelthari warships, fragments of shattered drones, the scattered remains of humanity's own fallen vessels. The stars, indifferent as ever, burned on. On the Resolute, Admiral Helena Vance stood at the forward viewport. The bridge crew moved with subdued efficiency, running damage reports and coordinating salvage teams. Victory did not erase the cost. Thousands of human lives had been given to secure it. But the enemy was gone. Commander Elias Park approached. "Outer perimeter confirms. The last Zelthari ship has crossed into interstellar space. No pursuit signatures." Vance allowed herself a slow breath. "Signal to all fleets. Stand down. Begin recovery operations." Across the system, battered ships eased into slower trajectories. Medical shuttles darted between fleets, carrying wounded to orbital hospitals. Families across Earth, Mars, and the colonies waited for news, their grief and pride already shaping the story of what had just happened. That story traveled faster than any fleet. Within hours, transmissions from the Sol system had reached the Grand Assembly of Allied Worlds. Delegates who had watched the first battle with skepticism now stared in open disbelief at the final footage. Zelthari warships retreating under. A human blockade, their formation shattered. "They forced the Zelthari to flee," whispered the Zarelian envoy, its crystalline form trembling. "No one has ever done this." The Larathi delegate, who had studied the human strategy closely, clicked his claws in approval. They fought 10 battles as if they were won. Each fleet learned from the last, and each battle bled the enemy further. It was beautiful. But not all responses were admiration. Some representatives shifted uneasily in their seats. A species that could build and launch 10 fleets, sustain them through prolonged warfare, and emerge victorious against the most feared power in the galaxy was no longer just a curiosity. It was a new variable in the balance of power. On the Yaxate's Zelthari homeworld, the news was received with shock bordering on disbelief. For centuries, their military had been the galaxy's unchallenged apex. Now, their aura of inevitability was cracked. Fleetmaster Zorath faced the unenviable task of explaining the loss to the High Command. Even before the formal inquest began, whispers spread through their ranks. The humans fight differently. Back on Earth, the reaction was as varied as humanity itself. Cities erupted in celebration. News networks replayed the launch of the 10 fleets, the turning points of each battle, and the final moment when the 10th Fleet arrived without firing a shot. Families held vigils for the lost, their names added to memorial rolls that would be engraved on monuments from the Pacific coast to the domes of Mars. In the assembly chamber weeks later, a formal address was given by Admiral Vance herself, projected in full scale, standing at the center of the galactic stage. "We did not fight for conquest," she told them, her voice carrying to every corner of the vast hall. "We fought because we were given no choice. The Zelthari came believing one fleet could decide our fate. We showed them that humanity is never one fleet, one battle, or one plan. We are many, and we endure." The phrase caught fire in the days that followed. 10 fleets became a rallying cry, a term that passed into galactic lexicon as shorthand for overwhelming, coordinated defiance. In military academies far from Earth, cadets studied the campaign as an example of adaptive warfare. Traders in distant markets sold holoprints of the 10 armadas launching side by side. And for the Zelthari, the name was a warning. No longer could they assume swift submission from a weaker foe. Somewhere out there, another world might look at Earth's example and choose to resist. On a clear night in the hills outside Geneva, Admiral Vance visited a quiet memorial site. She looked up at the stars, each one a reminder of how vast and dangerous the galaxy remained. But now, humanity had a place in it, a place carved out by courage, sacrifice, and the refusal to bow. She touched the engraved names and whispered, "They'll remember." Above her, the stars shone on, silent, witnesses to the birth of a legend.